Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Lost in the Wasteland, my weekly interview show where I learn a little bit more about somebody else's perspective on movies. And joining me, a special guest, director James Kicklighter. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me to talk about your film and about movies in general.
Thanks for having me, Shane. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So before we get into all my questions and getting to know you through what you love about movies, let's talk a little bit about your film, The American Question. So tell the audience a little bit about it.
Yeah, I spent 8 years directing a documentary called The American Question that examines how America got polarized and lost trust in each other and what we can do to make it better. And so, something that I was really trying to do in that film is make something that you could sit down with your conservative cousin or a liberal aunt or whatever it
Mhm.
is and be able to watch that together in 90 minutes and then have a conversation. Because that to me was one of the things that popped out of the 2016 election to say that a lot of people across the country just aren't able to have these discussions with people anymore. And so I really tried to make something that examined how this occurred and what you can do to make it better at home. So I'm hoping with Thanksgiving coming up that
Yes.
some people might be able to sit down and watch it together and have a more productive conversation around the holiday table.
Well, yeah, it is a very timely point in the year with Thanksgiving and Christmas and whatever holidays you might be celebrating around family or friends that, you might not agree with. And it certainly is a film that really puts you in a seat where you hear from people that you probably don't hear from very often. And I can attest, I know a lot of people that have become very like put in this self-isolated tunnel vision
Mhm.
of where it's like you don't converse with a whole lot of people that don't agree with you. And speaking from my own experiences of having a lot of friends and family who don't all agree on things, and it's like I don't think a lot of people even will spend the time to like listen to somebody who disagrees with them and even just like hear directly from who said it
And
because a lot of
that's
times it just clips and quotes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's largely because, we've self-sorted quite a bit, even with our own families, where there are
Mhm.
people that, you exit the group chat because you don't want to have this discussion or hear someone rant and rave about a specific topic. And so I think that, one things that we wanted to do with our film is say, how can we have those
Mhm.
conversations again? And for me, growing up in a town of 123 people in the South, living in Los Angeles, I'm acutely aware of the diversity of views that we have in this country. And so it was really important to me to say, what can we do to try to help us understand each other a little bit better so we can have more productive conversation?
Absolutely. And hopefully you all go check out this film. It's 90 minutes. It's a really interesting and engaging experience. And it's one of those kinds of films that will last with you afterwards because it is giving you, hey, think about this and
Mhm.
do this. But I guess, James, where can people find your film?
You can watch The American Question on all platforms on demand, everything from Apple to Amazon to YouTube, Google Play, cable, Blu-ray, and DVD. So take your platform of choice.
Mm, there you go. It's everywhere. You have no excuses. So there you go.
Exactly.
But so, everybody, please make sure to go check out American Question. But let's jump into getting to know you a little bit, James. And with everybody's favorite question, what's your favorite film?
That's a question that everyone always likes to ask. My favorite film of all time is Network. It's
Oh,
Sidney Lumet's masterpiece, and I think it's just a perfect film from the way that it is performed to written and
mhm.
shot. One thing that always has been an inspiration to me as a director that works between, documentaries, ads, and scripted work is that Lumet started out in documentaries and television work. And one thing that he really learned in doing that, especially in television, was the value of the lens, that he could
Yep.
immediately tell you when he was shooting something, this is something that needs a 50, this is something that needs an 85. And he'd be able to know that through his encyclopedic knowledge of changing lenses as a camera operator in the 40s and 50s. And so for me, when I watch watch Network, I'm drawn not only by, well, how executed that
Mhm.
entire film is, but also how well shot it is. And it's really because of that encyclopedic knowledge and extensive collaboration with his DP that creates that world.
Well, and especially too, because if you look at it on paper, it doesn't seem to be the kind of film that might stand out because it
No,
is a lot of talking, discussions, and stuff like that. But that film is dynamic, and you can
it's
tell that somebody really understood what they were doing behind the camera to do it. And all the performances are incredible, and that film just feels like it keeps getting more and more relevant
It
every time you watch
does.
it.
And the thing that's to me that's always striking about a film that, is a classic, a masterpiece, is that they're just as relevant and in conversation with the present day as they were in the time that it was made. And Network for me is one of those films that at the time was shot as a satire, and now you would argue perhaps is not one. And so I believe that anytime a film can evolve with the times is always something remarkable. And as you say, the challenge of shooting dialogue that's almost stage-like quality,
Yeah.
and to make that compelling and urgent and have that sense of propulsion is a really challenging thing to do as a
Yeah.
director. And I think he pulls it off beautifully.
Absolutely. I think he's one of the kinds of directors that is one of the all-time great filmmakers, but isn't up in that conversation, I feel like, enough with a lot of
I
people. So,
agree. I think he's someone that people should examine because he really took swings. The thing that I
mhm,
have always appreciated about his career, him and Jonathan Demme, the two of them
yep,
have always been inspirations to me because they really did take lots of swings between different genres, different types of films, and some of them work, some of them don't, just like any other director, and myself included.
yeah,
And like what I appreciate is that they always were trying to challenge themselves. And to me, that directors that do that are usually some of the best because when you make your best work, it's because of the different swings you've made.
absolutely. And interesting bring up Jonathan Demme. Getting a chance to see Stop Making Sense in a theater, the Talking Heads concert film was one of my favorite moments of, was that earlier this year? Kind of bleeds together, but like within the past year, getting to see that on an IMAX screen, which was really awesome too, and just feeling like I felt like I was on stage with them. And it's one of those kinds of engrossing experiences.
Yeah.
But thinking about going to the theater, what's your earliest memory of going to the movies?
So I was racking my head for this earlier, and I
Mhm,
realized that I had to check the dates on this because there were
mhm.
two films that immediately come to mind. In 1994, there were two seminal animated films that were
Yeah.
released. Lion King is the first one that people think of, but the second is Thumbelina. And I
Nice.
remember when I was a kid, we went to go see Thumbelina, and somewhere halfway through Thumbelina, I'm
Yeah.
not a great orator, don't, you'll have to forgive me, but my dad started snoring halfway through the movie, and my mom had to keep waking him up because he kept falling asleep through the entire Don Bluth film. And then
Mhm.
after that, of course, I remember going to see The Lion King and being terrified of the sequence with Scar. And so those are my immediate memories of going to the movies, my very first ones.
I
Yeah.
appreciated that because growing up throughout the 90s too, it's like having that experience watching Disney movies, but also the real ones remember all those Don Bluth movies that came out the same exact time and experiencing all of those as well. That's always a fun thing thinking back to those kinds of films. And it's like, I don't think I've watched Thumbelina in probably like 20
Oh, I
years
don't either, but I
plus.
have probably not seen Thumbelina in 20, 25 years minimum. And I still remember that music vividly in my
Mhm.
head. I can remember, jabbing my dad and or my mom jabbing my dad in the theater to stop snoring, repeatedly because it was, definitely a kids movie. There's that delineation animation between animated films there for kids and animated films there for everybody. And Thumbelina is not the one for everybody. And so I think that was my first observation of that I
Mhm.
remember now as a professional to say that like, oh yeah, this is not a movie that was made for adults, and my dad was just bored to tears.
Yeah, I distinctly remember a lot because I think about it a lot going to see Shrek for the first time
Yeah.
when, it's 10 years old and my mom and my aunt being mortified when, the
Uh-huh.
adult parts of the movie And then you're just like, this is in a kid's movie. But
Right.
we didn't get that.
And
We
then
do now.
going back to watch them as adults to say, oh, I see what this thing was that was just like, oh my gosh, you have these moments, and that's
Mhm.
really the fun part about those type of films that have lots of layers.
Yeah,
You've got one audience that you're targeting, and then you've got the broader audience that's also watching it. So I think it's an interesting lesson to observe.
absolutely. Now, thinking about some other kinds of favorites, do you have a particular favorite genre of movies?
I'm definitely a drama guy. I
Okay.
love a very good drama, but usually with a tinge of comedy. So, for example, this year
Mhm.
I've really enjoyed Saturday Night, The Substance,
Yep.
Challengers, The Apprentice, Dee Dee. Those are some films I've really enjoyed that all are dramas at their core, but have
Yes.
this really nice, sharp sense of dark humor that's kind of subtle underneath. But I also enjoy a pure drama. Last night I saw Conclave, loved it, and so
Yep.
it's really I really like a drama that says something about the human condition, and I've always been drawn to those types of films.
Yeah, absolutely. And something like Challengers is still my favorite film from this year. And it's like, it's intense. And there's a lot going on in that film. And it's fun when you could have like that occasional, like, good laugh when it's like, yes, this is actually kind of being funny at the moment.
Yeah,
Or like Saturday Night, which I feel like trying to put that all together, if you didn't laugh at some point, you'd probably cry. So, like,
right.
that
Because
kind of
all of those
experience.
films kind of have this psychological tension that's going on underneath, and
Yep.
I'm very interested in the psychology of characters. And so when you're
Mhm.
able to craft a film that really digs into that, I'm always compelled.
Absolutely. Now, we already talked about a couple filmmakers at this point, but do you have a particular favorite filmmaker?
Oh, it's Sidney Lumet for sure.
There you go.
He's definitely my favorite. As I said, I have appreciated a few things about him outside of his filmmaking endeavors. I think that he also wrote the greatest book on
Mhm.
filmmaking, making movies, which I believe is essential for anyone who's an aspiring filmmaker. He really walks you through the process of what he learned and how to do it. And not everyone does that so clearly. It's not just a
Mhm.
memoir, it's also a tool. And so I've always been a fan of his. And I think that any filmmaker that can be generous enough to give insight to their process without, being bloviating is someone that you should pay attention to.
I had a friend of mine lend me that book, and that's my next book that I'm actually going to check out.
You got to
So I'm
read
going
it.
to,
It's great. I
you know,
think it's like you said, it's not just a memoir; it's a manual, and it's really, really acutely written. So I think you're going to enjoy it.
awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Now, thinking about in front of the camera, who were some of your favorite performers, actors, actresses?
Some of that's one of the toughest questions because
Yeah.
every I don't know if I necessarily have favorites per se because it's
Mhm.
always about the performance and what they're doing,
Mhm.
but I will say there are two actors right now that I think are doing really interesting things, and that's Adam Driver and Margot Robbie.
Yep.
One thing that I appreciate about both of them is how they really do take swings with their professional
Mhm.
career. Some actors do prefer to play it safe because of their career trajectories, representation pressures, all of those different commercial things that one has to consider in a professional career. But I always have appreciated over the last decade or so how the two of them have really done one for me, one for you, one for me, one
Yeah.
for you, and they really do it with aplomb. They both bring such a nice palette to the performances that they bring that are very authentic to those characters, and I've just been a big fan of their work.
Yeah, Adam Driver is such a fascinating person. It's like uh how he got onto my radar was actually before him being in Star Wars, which, like, you have
Yeah,
somebody who like was a figure piece in the
that's
latest Star
their
Wars
first
trilogy.
feeling. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
not. The Inside Llewyn Davis was the film that
Yeah.
really captured me for him. And with Margot Robbie, it's the same thing. People think about Wolf of Wall Street because it was such a strong, big debut for her on a large scale. But she's also done remarkable work in Bombshell, Babylon,
Yeah.
which I personally loved. And
Hmm.
so I think that actors like that they become aware. The awareness happens with the general public in those big films like Barbie or Star Wars. But you go back and look at some of their other work; they're doing really interesting things.
Yeah, I'm a huge Coen Brothers fan. So
Yeah.
whenever a new film comes out, I'm like, I needed to see Inside Llewyn Davis, and just remembering him making such a big impact for such a small role in it too. But and Margot Robbie, being Harley Quinn or doing Barbie. But I think maybe still my favorite performance is I, Tonya. That was a film
Yeah.
that uh
One
I
of my favorite
discovered.
films of the last 10 years.
Yeah,
It's brilliant.
I discovered a small indie theater near where I work and where I went to school because of that film. I'm like, I need to find I, Tonya. I'm like searching I, Tonya showtimes in New Jersey and found this small theater, and that opened up a whole entire set of experiences getting to see that. But they're both really impressive performers, and like you don't see a whole lot of A-listers doing things like Annette,
No.
like Adam
No.
Driver doing.
And I have to shout out I, Tonya for a second. Craig
Yeah.
Gillespie is a fantastic director as well. He
Mhm.
does remarkable work, and that was just one of those pieces, like you said, that really just you can see those machinations as a performer turning because an effective performer really embodies a role. They're not Margot Robbie on stage or Adam Driver on stage. They really become those characters. I think both of them do an excellent job of doing that.
Absolutely. Now, James, do you have a particular film that you feel like you could just watch like every day?
Absolutely. October Sky.
Oh,
October Sky, I can watch over and over and over again. And it makes me cry at the end every single time. It's a
mhm.
film that is so earnest in the most authentic of ways. That story speaks to me as someone who grew up in a small town and
Yeah.
aspired to do other things with my life. And, my father died when I was young. And so the story between, Homer Hickam and his father
Mhm.
trying to make him proud. It's something that's just really always spoke to me. It's a beautiful film. That score is also one of the best things Mark Isham has ever written, and
Mhm.
I sometimes play it while I'm writing things myself. I could watch it all day. Laura Dern, all of them. It's just terrific.
I distinctly remember reading the book when I
Mhm.
was younger. And I think my brother had to read the book for school, and then they showed the movie, and
Mhm.
then winding up watching that as well. And yeah, it's definitely one of those films that will get that emotional reaction out of you every time getting a chance to look at it. Now, what's a film that you connect with closely because it relates to another interest of yours?
Well, it probably shouldn't be a huge surprise to you that I love politics. I've always loved politics. And,
Mm,
the American question is the most overtly political thing I've made. But if I didn't work in film, I'd probably work in politics. And because of
mm,
that, my favorite film that people may not necessarily think of me liking is The Manchurian Candidate, John
mm.
Frankenheimer's.
Yeah.
It is a wonderful film about the backroom deal, and Angela
Mhm.
Lansbury gives a performance for the ages in that film. It's just a remarkable piece of filmmaking. And that's one that I think sometimes surprises people because it just, again, it has uh, those gears and you can see them turning throughout.
It's an incredible thriller. And as somebody who grew up watching Murder She Wrote with my mom and my
Yeah.
grandmom all the time, I was a little like, whoa, Angela Lansbury.
But it's
And
like Jessica Fletcher, what have you done? It's I get it. It's like the joke, of course, that I always grew up on with Murder She Wrote that you don't want to go to Cades Cove because or it's Cades Cove. No, it's not Cades Cove.
Cabico.
Cabot Cove, thank you. Cades
Yeah.
Cove is in the Rocky Mountain or in the Appalachian Mountains in
Mhm.
Tennessee, but you don't want to go there because you're going to die.
It's like I watched that so much growing up that I'm like, I want to retire to a Maine fishing village like
Right.
that. And then you're just like, but how many people get murdered in this
Right, the
place?
proportions are very high. So the key is that you retire there, so you're going to die there, and the population's just constantly replenished. I think there's maybe a good horror film in that.
That's a fascinating first story. But going back to Manchurian Candidate, I remember watching that in college for the first time, and that was one of the first films that I watched from like decades ago. That I'm like, wow, this packs a punch, like a thriller, like a
Yeah,
lot of modern films do. And I've never watched the remake, but I I
they're
haven't
different.
gotten.
The
Yeah,
remake's excellent too. Joff Demi just does something different with it.
yeah.
I think that sometimes people knock it because it's hard to hold a candle to that original film. But if you think of them as separate entities,
Mm,
they're both excellent. But I think that it's really important, again, for any aspiring filmmaker or someone that wants to work in film to go back and watch those classics,
mhm.
because a lot of the things that we see now, to understand how film has evolved, to understand how we've arrived at where we are now, you really need to see how we got there. And films
Yeah,
like Centurion Candid are excellent examples of how to construct a beautiful film.
absolutely. Now, who's a movie character that you feel like you connect with on a personal level?
William Miller from Almost Famous.
Oh,
When I was 16, I was working on my very first project, a documentary. I was still living in my hometown of 123 people, and a
mhm.
college professor had gotten some money to go do a documentary on a Western character actor named Deb Taylor. And at that point, I had not traveled very much. I had not gone many places. And over the course of 2 years, I went to about 18, 20 states, got to interview Dixie Carter and John Mellencamp and all of these people that had worked with Dub Taylor. And it was a very formative experience that felt a lot like William Miller's. That was a little bit of imposter syndrome. That was a little bit of we don't know what we're doing. That starstruck, it's David Zucker who directed, all these different things. I got to meet these people at a very early age, and it really set me on the trajectory that I ended up going on. And so for me, I think about William Miller a lot when I think of Almost Famous.
oh, I love Almost Famous.
It's
And
also that's one of my top five.
yeah,
Almost this is also one of those perfect movies to me that just again always pulls at the heartstrings, but also has that authenticity.
mm,
That's the key, I think, to any of those kind of dramas. Cameron Crowe pours a lot of what happened in his own life
yeah.
into that film, and I think that when we're able to leave that authenticity of our own life experiences, that really bleeds through onto the film.
Well, and that's awesome and fascinating that you had such an experience at like that formative age too, because that's one of those things like I jokingly call myself a hobbit. I don't leave a whole lot from my hobbit hole, but just watching something like Almost Famous and realizing it's like a journey like that could really make an impact on you.
It
And
does. And
yeah,
like even like, calling your mom, be like, I'm
yeah.
okay. Here's what I'm doing. I remember one day that we had come back from filming. I believe we were in San Francisco at the time, and I was 16, and everybody cracked open some beers and they passed it over to me, and they're like, oh shit, James is not 21. And things like that, I remember so vividly. So I think about William Miller, as I said, quite a bit.
Oh, my mom would be in today's day and
I don't
age as
think I
well.
told my
So
mom that, so this may be the first time she's going to hear it. I'm sorry, mom. They really didn't mean to. It was an accident, and that was the end of that. I think they even might have taken it away, but
there you go. Oh, my mom would have been texting me every 5 minutes. For sure on that kind of journey. My mom would be like Frances McDormand in
yeah,
the
of
movie.
course. And see, this was before, because I think I'm a little older than you, but we
Mm,
didn't have text to do that with at the time. It would cost 10 cents per text
yep.
to send that, so it was just phone calls.
Yeah, at that point, 16, I definitely barely had a little flip phone at
Sure.
that point. So I would definitely would have been getting a lot of phone
I had a
calls.
track phone from Walmart that had a prepaid data card and prepaid, minutes and such. So you could only talk for so long. And then, the pay phones were still around, but that was my primary form of contact.
There you go. And how lives change, and those are the fun things of watching back movies that take place in like the 70s. It's like
Yeah.
your mom can't constantly just be texting you the whole entire time, which
Right.
also is that much more terrifying as a mother, I would assume. Like
I'm sure, but there's also that balance because nothing too insane
mhm,
happened on my escapades doing that project, but it was also so formative for me as a person that I was able to see things without having my hand held as much, and really kind of develop that sense of independence, and that was a good value. I think that sometimes now perhaps parenting can be too much hand holding and you start getting out on your own and you haven't really had that opportunity. And so I in some ways pine for those days because
Yeah.
you really had that ability to explore yourself without all of that pressure that you have now from constant communication, from the internet, all of that. So I've always loved Almost Famous and William Miller.
Yeah. I work at a college.
Mhm.
I experience that a lot.
I'm sure you do.
It's a lot. I've been working at a college for 9 years now, and I experience that a lot more now, even than 9 years ago. So there you go. Now, James, what's a film that you feel like would surprise people that you love?
Across the Universe. I
Okay.
love Across the Universe. That's another film I can watch on repeat. The thing that I
Mhm,
love about Across the Universe again is those swings. The film
mhm,
is so theatrically staged. Julie Taymor just really takes some massive swings with that. Some of
mhm.
them work, some of them don't, but the
Yeah.
whole thing is just such a fascinating viewing experience. Like, how does this film even exist? It
Mm,
just really had some of the most stunning visuals I've ever seen in a film, coupled with Daniel Oesterlo's remarkable choreography.
mhm.
And so for me, it's Across the Universe. I can watch that over and over again, and I think that surprises some people.
I feel like it's an interesting thing with musicals for
Yeah.
sure that music and a visual experience can go a long way.
Mm.
Like some musicals, I'm like, did I connect with this story at all? But
Yeah.
no, I listen, those songs are going in my head nonstop, and I can watch it over and over and
Yeah,
over.
because Across the Universe is one of those films where the story is actually pretty thin.
Yes.
It's not a really thick story. It's not, that psychological drama that, we were
Mhm,
talking about earlier, but I have just always been remarkably compelled by how well executed that is.
mhm.
And it's again like a really hard film to pull off, and I think she does it very well.
Absolutely. Now, my last question for you, James, is what do you love most about movies?
Well, we've touched on this a little bit, but I
Mhm,
think for me, it is always about exploring the human condition. I'm innately curious about people and different walks of life and how
mhm,
people come to see things the way they see them, do things the way they do them. And for me, movies are a way to get inside that psychology. It's really
mhm,
about figuring out how a character or how an individual has become the way they are and what I can do to convey that to help understand the human condition writ large. Because for me, that's what movies are about. It's about trying to take elements of daily life that we sometimes see, that we sometimes don't, and package it in a way where someone can understand something new about themselves or about other people. That to me is the magic of movies, and there are very few mediums that can do that effectively.
mhm.
So that's one reason I've really enjoyed being a storyteller.
Absolutely. And I could definitely tell that through our conversation, obviously, that connection with being able to see into a character and understand their experiences. And that is a very powerful thing when it comes
It's
to
point of
film.
it's point of view, right? Because
Yep.
as a director, your job is to, in my mind, remove some of your own personal biases and sit yourself at this different vantage point and say, okay, this is what I'm trying to tell, and this is how this person or character or whatever it is has arrived there. How am I going to understand that psychology so I can effectively convey that to a viewer? And so the thing that's great about that is it allows you to understand the world and people in ways that not all professions, I think, give you that opportunity to do. And that makes life a lot more interesting because you become more curious about people and the world
Yeah.
itself.
Well, and that's the thing too, looking at a film, if your film's all filled with characters that are exactly like you, it's not going to be a very interesting film because
No,
you're not going to have the conflict. You're not going to have the friction and the tension of what's going on between them. So it's such a fascinating experience getting to see human beings come to life on a screen for sure.
Always. And
But
that's why I like going between documentaries, scripted, and ads, because you really get to bring a little bit of those different mediums into the other. You're able to learn about people, real people in documentaries, and apply that to your scripted work, and so on and so forth. I think that there's a lot of crossover between doing different things, and that's why I enjoy doing it.
absolutely. Now, James, I like to wrap up my show by having my guests ask me a question. So, what would you like to ask the Wasteland reviewer?
Of course, that's a big question, a big responsibility. I what when you what was it that made you first feel passionate about movies? Because I find that different people obviously have lots of different passions about many things. People get into sports or art or whatever it is, but people that get into movies usually get into them for specific reasons. So why movies? Why that massive DVD collection behind you?
Yes. I remember from being a young kid watching movies all the time. And, you wind up finding that point where it stops being like, I just really enjoy watching movies. And like, I really love this for being more than just like entertainment for me. And I distinctly remember taking a film class in high school because I'm like, I really enjoy watching movies and like I would love to actually like take a class on this. And taking that film class in high school really reframes because it made me watch a lot of films that I don't usually watch. Because like my collection really started off with like I had my Star Wars movies, I had my James Bond movies, I had my Indiana Jones and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And the first film we watched in that was Cool Hand Luke.
Mm.
And that was a interesting film and like we spent a lot of time really drilling down into a lot of the symbolism that's in that film, which there's a lot because Lucas Jackson very much is a Christ-like figure in that film and all that imagery. And those are things that still stick with me because we spent so much time really dissecting that. We had a whole month on Hitchcock. And like I went to my local library because we had an assignment write about one of his films we didn't watch in class. And I remember getting North by Northwest at my
Yeah.
local library because it was the only one they had. And I took it and just going on that kind of adventure. And also how films have changed for me. I remember we watched Raging Bull in that
Mhm.
class, and I hated it. I, as a 16-year-old, I'm just saying, like, that was like 2 hours of two Italian men screaming the F word at each
Right,
other.
of course.
And, and then thinking about, like, that is true. That does indeed happen.
But there's
But
more to it, and you realize that later, right?
yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And now, being an Italian American from New Jersey, I appreciate so much about what Martin Scorsese does because it's like I'm seen in a lot of those films. And it's just like, yeah, I know that experience. And you
Mm.
automatically have that kind of connection. Watching even just watching his documentary Italian American, where he literally just interviews his parents, I'm
Yeah.
just like, I get all of this because I grew up in a household with my grandparents.
Yeah.
It's just something special. And that class did a big thing for me for sure. And I joined Alternative Films Club in college, which we only watched independent foreign and classic films.
Wow.
So it really broadened my horizons with things. And now I watch anything from any time, from anywhere. And that's exciting to me. There's no limitations anymore. It's like whether it's like watching a documentary short film from the 60s
Mhm.
that got nominated for an Oscar. I just recorded a podcast with a friend of mine. It's literally what it was, Chagall,
Yeah.
narrated by Vincent Price, him
Right.
just talking over these paintings and stuff like that. Or, I'm going to see Moana 2 today. There's a
Mm.
wide range of different experiences, and that's the exciting thing about movies. So,
I'm the same exact way. I watch
mhm,
everything. And
yeah.
it's fun because some directors watch everything and some do not. But as for me, I really enjoy watching
Mhm,
everything because it really is informative to me about different processes, about different storytelling
yeah.
methods, using iconography and visuals to create moments. And I think the more you watch, the more you're able to apply that to your own work because essentially, all films are a copy, right?
Yes.
We've had it long enough to know that we're referencing different shots, you're referencing different ideas, and so it's really the question of they're the same seven stories you can tell over and over and
Mhm.
over again. How are you going to interpret them and tell them for an audience that that is the great challenge and great creative process of filmmaking.
Awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time today to chat with me about movies.
Now it's a pleasure. Thank you, Shane.
And please go check out The American Question everywhere. You can find it anywhere, rent it, and make sure to check out James's film. But thank you as always for tuning in and supporting your Wasteland reviewer.